A thorough assessment of the Robert Morris/Cindy Clemishire case and the recent sentencing reveals a catastrophic failure of individual morality and institutional accountability. A long-delayed guilty plea that brings a measure of justice while also exposing a plea deal that many view as unacceptably lenient, the crime and the conviction. Robert Preston Morris, the founder and former senior pastor of Gateway Church in Southlake, Texas, pleaded guilty on October 2, 2025, to 5 felony counts of lewd or indecent acts with a child for abuse that began in December 1982 when the victim, Cindy Clemishire, was 12 years old. Why this is especially grievous. Morris was a traveling evangelist who stayed in Clemishire's family home when the abuse began. The facts, as laid out in court and in contemporaneous emails and transcripts, describe a horrific exploitation of position, trust, and spiritual authority. A predator using ministry access and a household's hospitality to victimize a child. The victim's voice, Cindy Clemishire, who came forward publicly and who has pursued civil action against Morris and Gateway Church, delivered a blistering impact statement in court. Let me be clear, there is no such thing as consent from a 12-year-old child. We were never in an inappropriate relationship. I was not a young lady, but a child. You committed a crime against me. Her testimony is the moral center of this case, the sentencing and its contested consequences. Under the plea agreement, Morris received a 10-year sentence, but the practical effect is that he will serve 6 months in Osage County Jail with the balance suspended and be placed on long-term supervision. He will register as a sex offender and pay restitution. Outlets report restitution in the low to mid 6 figures, with some variation among reports. The short custodial period, 6 months behind bars for repeated abuse of a child over years, has stoked public outrage and raised hard questions about how the criminal justice system handles historic abuse cases against powerful people. Institutional accountability at Gateway Church. Reporting and documents disclosed during litigation and media inquiries indicate serious governance failures at Gateway Church. Emails from 2005 and other internal communications suggest church leaders were aware of contact between Clemishire and Morris, and that some leaders either mischaracterized the allegations or failed to investigate fully. Following public disclosure, the church acknowledged mistakes and removed some leaders. Clemishire has also filed civil claims alleging a coordinated effort to minimize or misdescribe the abuse. Thorough, condemning assessment, in full support for Cindy Clemishire. This is a horror story that should have never had a second act. What the facts show, corroborated by prosecutors and multiple news organizations, is a young man, a supposed spiritual leader, who exploited hospitality and a position of trust to sexually abuse a 12-year-old child repeatedly over several years. That man later built a megachurch, amassed national influence and political access, and allowed the trappings of power to insulate him and his institution from accountability for far too long. The guilty plea preserves a factual record that aligns with the survivor's account. It is a vindication of Cindy Clemishire's courage, but it is also a far too small answer to the moral questions that remain. 1. The moral injury is profound and lasting. There are plenty of words for criminal acts. Inappropriate behavior is not one of them when what the court record and eyewitness accounts describe is repeated sexual abuse of a child. For decades, Morris and some of his defenders used language that minimized the damage, calling the misconduct inappropriate sexual behavior, or referring to the survivor as a young lady. Those euphemisms did active harm. They rewrote the story to shrink the perpetrator's responsibility and to silence the lived reality of a child who was molested. The survivor has been crystal clear. She was a child, and she was abused. The law and the moral imagination must take that clarity seriously. 2. Power and access were weaponized against a child. What separates this case from a regrettable lapse is the weaponization of pastoral authority. Morris was not a random stranger. He was a minister, a trusted guest in a family's home, and later a national religious figure. The abuse, as described in reporting and court materials, was not a single lapse, but a pattern that continued across years and locations. That pattern is classic grooming, control, secrecy, manipulation, and the leveraging of trust to isolate and silence a child. That is not merely a private failing. It is a profound moral betrayal committed by someone whose public role was to shepherd vulnerability, not prey on it. 3. Attempts to buy silence expose the depth of the ethical rot. The released transcripts and emails from the mid-2000s, which include the survivor's attempts to get accountability and the defendant's alleged suggestion that she put a price on it, show an effort to monetize concealment instead of facing truth and consequence. If the facts in those transcripts are accurate, as multiple outlets have reported, the conversation about put a price on it is a literal admission that the subject saw the harm as something transactional rather than criminal and morally devastating. That willingness to make silence negotiable is mind-numbingly cynical and demonstrates callous disregard for the lifelong harm inflicted on Clemishire. 4. Institutional failures at Gateway Church compound the injury. Religious institutions exist to protect the vulnerable, not to shield leaders. Yet the public record here contains repeated indications that, at crucial moments, church processes, communication, and governance failed. Emails from 2005, internal responses, and later statements by elders show a pattern where church leadership either misread the testimony, mischaracterized the complaint as an adult consensual relationship, or failed to take adequate steps to investigate and report. The consequence: an environment where protecting a prominent figure was prioritized over protecting a child and providing full, transparent accountability. That is institutional malpractice. 5. The plea deal's limited prison time is a moral and civic problem. Justice is not merely the label on a conviction, it is the proportional accountability that follows. Morris's plea, 10 years on paper but 6 months in county custody and practice, feels insufficient to many precisely because of the facts. Multiple felony counts, repeated abuse, the clear imbalance of power, and the breached trust of a religious community. There are legitimate reasons prosecutors sometimes accept plea deals: evidentiary limitations in decades-old cases, the survivor's wishes, and the practicalities of trial risk. But the public response is understandable. The punishment appears tiny compared to the magnitude of harm. When influential figures receive effectively short custodial sentences for heinous conduct, it corrodes public faith in the idea that laws blind to power. 6. Inconsistent reporting on restitution. Transparency matters. Different outlets report slightly different restitution figures. Some report about $250,000, others around $270,000. That inconsistency matters because it is a symbol of the fuzziness that has surrounded how this matter was handled. Survivors deserve clarity. The public deserves a consistent account from the institutions and the court. The confusion over numbers is not the worst detail here, but it is emblematic of how opacity has followed the situation at multiple stages. 7. The survivor's bravery must be centered. The community must listen Cindy Clemishire's decision to come forward, to speak her truth after decades, to produce old emails to face public scrutiny, is a profound act of moral courage. Any assessment that does not center her voice risks silencing the one person who endured the harm. For clergy, church members, and the broader public, Clemishire's testimony should be the lodestar for reform. She speaks not only for herself, but for other survivors who lack the platform or stamina to endure public exposure. The moral posture is simple: believe survivors, investigate promptly, and prioritize care and restitution. 8. Concrete reform demands for faith communities. This case must be more than a news cycle. It must drive non-negotiable reforms for faith organizations. Mandatory, independent investigations whenever credible abuse allegations surface. Transparent documentation of what leadership knew and when, with independent audits of internal decision-making. Whistleblower protections and a clear external reporting pathway to law enforcement, not just internal committees. Survivor-centered remedies, trauma-informed care, public accounting, and measurable reparative actions. Churches are not above accountability. Their moral credibility depends on it. 9. On repentance and the limits of private penance. Morris's statement that he's at peace and that guilt will be a penance is a private expression, but it cannot substitute for public structural accountability. Repentance in a leadership role requires more than words. It requires transparent acceptance of legal consequences, active cooperation with survivors, and substantive steps to repair institutional harm. When a leader's public posture toward wrongdoing centers his comfort, rather than survivor care and truth-telling, it looks like reputation management, not repentance. 10. A final blunt reckoning. Let's be clear and uncompromising. A pastor who sexually abused a child, who attempted to minimize or monetize silence, and whose leadership circle failed to protect the child, that is a moral catastrophe. The guilty plea is right. It affirms the truth Clemishire has lived with for decades. But truth without proportional consequence and without institutional reform is an incomplete answer. The church, its leaders, and civic institutions must do better. More transparency, fuller accountability, and unwavering support for survivors. Enough euphemism, enough coddling of celebrity. This is about vindicating a survivor and ensuring that the next child has systems in place that make such exploitation impossible. Sources for the key factual claims. Selected Oklahoma Attorney General press release confirming the guilty pleas and charges. Coverage of the plea, sentence, and supervision terms. Texas Tribune/Associated Press. Victim impact statement and direct quotes from Cindy Clemishire. Reporting on the 2005 emails, sourced alleged attempt to buy silence and leaked transcripts. Reporting and documents showing questions about what Gateway Church leadership knew and when, and subsequent internal accountability actions. Coverage noting differing reported restitution amounts and public response to sentence leniency. Closing. My direct blunt message to Robert Morris. A plea deal does not erase the moral truth of what you did. Saying you are at peace is no substitute for the moral repair owed to the person you harmed and to every person whose faith was betrayed by your actions. To Gateway Church leadership, apologies without full transparency and independent investigation are not sufficient. You have an obligation to truth, to survivors, and to the public. Remove the glass from around your leaders. Let sunlight and independent inquiry do their work. To Cindy Clemishire, you have my support. Your courage did what silence could not. You forced a reckoning that the institution resisted. I stand with your demand for truth, consequence, and real repair.